They said she ruined herself the night she stood in a drawing room full of London's elite and called a member of Parliament a liar to his face. They said he built his entire life on a single principle. That reputation, once lost, could never be recovered. What no one said, what no one could have predicted, was that a royal decree would bind them together for 6 months, forcing the kingdom's most ungovernable woman into the care of its most unforgiving duke. This is not a story of taming. This is a story of two people who believed they had nothing left to lose until they risked losing each other. If you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, leave a comment telling me where you're from. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. This one is going to stay with you. The morning after her public disgrace, Eleanor Ashford woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. The kind that came when invitations stopped arriving, when morning callers suddenly remembered previous engagements, when even the servants began to avert their eyes as though scandal were contagious. She stood at her bedroom window, still in her nightdress, watching the street below. Across the square, Lady Pemberton's carriage rolled past without slowing. 2 weeks ago, Lady Pemberton had called Eleanor refreshingly candid. Yesterday, she'd crossed the street to avoid her. Eleanor pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. She did not regret what she had said. Lord Havering was a liar. His bill would have stripped tenant farmers of protections her own father had spent years securing. She had seen the documents. She had done the research. But no one cared about documents when a 23-year-old unmarried woman interrupted a parliamentary discussion to call a titled man a fraud. They cared about decorum, about her place, about the fact that she'd spoken at all. Her mother hadn't looked at her since. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor turned as her younger sister, Caroline, slipped inside, closing the door with exaggerated care. "You're not dressed," Caroline whispered, as though someone might overhear. "There's nowhere to go." Caroline winced. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of Eleanor's bed, worrying the hem of her sleeve. She was 19, sweet-faced. The kind of girl who'd never once questioned the world she'd been born into. "Mama says the Duke of Greymont is coming this afternoon," Caroline said quietly. Eleanor turned sharply. "Why?" "I don't know, but she's been crying." That should have alarmed her more than it did. Their mother was not a woman prone to tears. She was a woman prone to strategy, to maneuvering, to ensuring that her daughters married well and quietly. Eleanor's scandal had unraveled 5 years of careful social architecture. "Perhaps he's come to formally cut ties," Eleanor said. "His late wife was Mama's second cousin. He probably feels obligated to make some official statement of disapproval." Caroline shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. She told the staff to prepare the formal sitting room." That was strange. Eleanor said nothing. She moved to her wardrobe and dressed herself. Her lady's maid had resigned 3 days prior, choosing a plain grey gown with minimal trim. If the Duke of Greymont had come to deliver judgment, she would not perform penitence. But she would not provoke him either. She was tired in a way that sleep could not touch. The Duke of Greymont arrived precisely at 3 o'clock. Eleanor watched from the upstairs corridor as he was shown into the sitting room. He moved with the kind of rigid control that seemed carved into him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark coat immaculate, his expression unreadable. He was perhaps 35, though he carried himself like a man much older. Everything about him suggested order, restraint. A man who had never in his entire life done anything he had not first calculated. She had met him twice before, once at her cousin's wedding, once at a formal dinner where he had spoken a total of 11 words to her, all of them polite and forgettable. He did not seem like the kind of man who forgave. When the housekeeper came to summon her, Eleanor descended the stairs slowly. Her mother stood in the foyer, pale and tight-lipped. She did not speak. She simply gestured toward the sitting room. Eleanor entered alone. The Duke stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. He did not turn immediately. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the mantel clock. Then he spoke. "Miss Ashford." His voice was low, clipped, not unkind, just absent of warmth. "Your Grace." She curtsied briefly, properly. He turned then, and his gaze settled on her. Pale grey eyes, sharp and assessing. He did not look angry. He looked like a man conducting an inspection. "I will not waste your time with pretense," he said. "I have been summoned by the Crown." Eleanor blinked. Whatever she'd expected, it was not that. "The Prince Regent is concerned," the Duke continued. his tone flat as though reciting a legal document. "Your actions at Lord Havering's gathering have caused significant embarrassment to those in his circle. There are whispers that you acted on behalf of certain reformist factions. Others believe you are simply unstable." The word landed like a stone. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "I am neither unstable nor anyone's agent. I spoke the truth." "The truth," he repeated quietly, "is rarely the issue in matters of reputation." She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. He had not said it cruelly. He had said it like a man stating a fact he had long ago accepted. "Why are you here?" she asked. He studied her for a moment longer, then reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter, sealed with the royal crest. He held it out. Eleanor took it, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the seal. The letter was brief, formal, and devastating. In light of recent events and in consideration of Miss Eleanor Ashford's welfare and public standing, it is hereby decreed that she shall be placed under the supervision and authority of His Grace, the Duke of Greymont, for a period of 6 months. During this time she will reside at Greymont Hall and conduct herself in accordance with his guidance and discretion. Failure to comply will result in the withdrawal of royal protection and patronage, which will in turn lead to her exclusion from London society and the severe diminishment of her family's remaining standing. Eleanor read it twice, then a third time. "This is a joke," she whispered. "It is not. They cannot simply assign me to you like a ward. I am not a child." "No," he agreed. "You are a liability, and the Crown has decided that I am the appropriate person to manage you." The word manage made her blood heat. She looked up sharply, meeting his gaze. "And you agreed to this?" For the first time, something flickered across his face, something she could not name, resentment perhaps, or resignation. "I was not given a choice," he said quietly. The room seemed to shrink. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, though her hands were shaking. "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow morning. You may bring a single trunk, no personal maid, no private companion." "No witness, you mean?" His expression did not change. "You misunderstand, Miss Ashford. This is not a punishment. It is an opportunity. 6 months of silence, of appropriate conduct, and your reputation may yet be salvaged." "And if I refuse?" "Then you condemn not only yourself but your family, your sister's prospects, your mother's standing. Every door that remains even slightly ajar will close." He was right. She knew he was right. But the injustice of it, the sheer suffocating unfairness, made it hard to breathe. "You must think me reckless," she said quietly. "Foolish." The Duke tilted his head slightly, considering. "I think," he said slowly, "that you believed consequence would not reach you. That is not foolishness, it is privilege." The words were a slap. A precise, bloodless slap. Eleanor lifted her chin. "I will be ready tomorrow, Your Grace." He inclined his head. "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back at her. For just a moment she thought she saw something in his expression, not sympathy, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, perhaps. Or simply weariness. "Pack warm clothes," he said. "Greymont Hall is not London." Then he was gone. Eleanor stood alone in the sitting room, the letter still clutched in her hand, and for the first time since the scandal broke, she let herself feel the full weight of what she had lost, and what she was about to face. The journey to Greymont Hall took 2 days. Eleanor sat across from the Duke in his carriage, a space so silent it felt deliberate. He read correspondence for most of the first day, his posture immaculate, his focus absolute. He did not make small talk. He did not ask her questions. He treated her presence the way one might treat a necessary piece of luggage. She told herself she preferred it this way. By the second afternoon, the landscape had changed. London's clutter gave way to rolling fields, dense woods, and finally, as the sun began to dip low, the stark, imposing silhouette of Greymont Hall. It was not beautiful. It was formidable. Built of grey stone, with tall, narrow windows and a columned entrance that seemed designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. The estate sat atop a low hill like a watchman. There were no flowering gardens, no ornamental hedges, just clean lines, perfect symmetry, and an air of cold, unyielding permanence. The Duke did not look at it as they approached. He simply gathered his papers, straightened his coat, and waited for the carriage to stop. When the door opened, he descended first, then turned and offered his hand without looking at her. Eleanor hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, impersonal, and lasted exactly as long as necessary. The staff waited in 2 precise rows at the entrance. The housekeeper, a tall iron-haired woman named Mrs. Halloway, stood at the front. She curtsied as the Duke approached, her expression neutral but sharp-eyed. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Halloway, this is Miss Ashford. She will be residing here for the next 6 months." The housekeeper's gaze shifted to Eleanor. There was no warmth in it, no judgment either, just assessment. "Yes, Your Grace. Her rooms are prepared." "Good. See that she's settled. I'll speak with her in the library at 7. He did not wait for a reply. He simply walked inside, his footsteps echoing across the marble floor, and disappeared into the depths of the house. Eleanor stood there, suddenly aware of how small she felt. Mrs. Halloway gestured toward the entrance. "This way, Miss Ashford." Her rooms were on the 2nd floor in the east wing. They were spacious, well-appointed, and utterly impersonal. The walls were pale blue. The furniture was dark wood, well-made but severe. There were no paintings, no books, no evidence that anyone had ever lived here. A fire had been lit in the grate. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed, unopened. "You'll take your meals in the breakfast room unless His Grace requests otherwise," Mrs. Halloway said from the doorway. "There is a maid assigned to you, Mary. She'll attend you in the mornings. You are not to leave the grounds without permission. You are not to receive visitors without prior approval." Eleanor turned slowly. "Am I a guest or a prisoner?" "You are a responsibility," Mrs. Halloway said calmly. "His Grace takes his responsibilities seriously." "And what does he expect of me?" "He expects you to follow the rules." "Which are?" Mrs. Halloway's expression did not shift. "He'll explain them himself." Then she was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind her. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. It was clean, quiet, safe. It felt like a tomb. At 7 o'clock, Eleanor made her way downstairs. The library was easy to find. It occupied the entire west wing of the 1st floor, its double doors open just enough to reveal rows of dark shelves and the flicker of lamplight. She knocked once. "Enter." The Duke sat behind a wide desk near the far window, writing something in a ledger. He did not look up as she stepped inside. "Close the door." She did. He continued writing for another 30 seconds, long enough that Eleanor began to suspect it was intentional. Then he set down his pen, blotted the ink, and finally met her gaze. "Sit." There was a chair across from the desk. She sat. He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "I am not your jailer, Miss Ashford, nor am I your companion. I am, by order of the Crown, charged with your supervision. That means it is my responsibility to ensure that you do not further damage yourself, or anyone else, during your time here." "I damaged no one," she said quietly. "You damaged a political process. You damaged your family's standing. You damaged your own future." He paused. "Whether or not you believe your actions were justified is irrelevant. The damage is real." Eleanor's nails bit into her palms. She said nothing. "You will have freedom within these walls," he continued. "You may walk the grounds. You may use the library. You may occupy yourself as you see fit. But you will not leave the estate. You will not correspond with anyone outside this household without my review. You will not speak to the staff about political matters, social matters, or anything that might find its way into gossip. So I am to be silent." "You are to be careful," he corrected. "Silence may be the wisest form of care." She met his gaze. "And what do you gain from this arrangement, Your Grace? Surely babysitting a disgraced woman is beneath your station." Something flickered across his face. Irritation, perhaps, or something colder. "I gain nothing," he said quietly. "I lose time. I lose privacy. I lose the ability to manage my own household without interference." He leaned forward slightly. "But I was commanded by the Crown, and I do not disobey the Crown. So we are both here, Miss Ashford, whether we wish it or not." There was no self-pity in his voice, just fact. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since arriving. He was handsome in a severe way, all sharp lines and controlled expressions. But there was something else too, something tightly wound, as though he were holding himself together through sheer force of will. "Why you?" she asked quietly. Why did they choose you? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Because I am known for discipline, for discretion, for a household free of scandal, and you've never questioned that. No. Why not? Because questioning achieves nothing. He stood abruptly, signaling the end of the conversation. You will take breakfast at 8. You will comport yourself appropriately, and you will remember that every choice you make here reflects not only on you but on me. Eleanor rose slowly. She wanted to argue, to push, but she was exhausted. Is that all, Your Grace? He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. One more thing. Yes? Do not mistake my formality for cruelty, he said quietly. I am not your enemy. Then what are you? He did not answer. He simply returned to his desk, picked up his pen and resumed writing. Eleanor left the library, her chest tight, her mind spinning. As she climbed the stairs back to her room, she realized something unsettling. The Duke of Greymont was not cruel. He was not cold. He was something far more dangerous. He was alone. The first week passed in careful, measured silence. Eleanor learned the rhythms of Greymont Hall quickly. Breakfast at 8, always alone in the small breakfast room overlooking the East Gardens. The Duke took his meals in his study. Lunch was brought to her on a tray. Dinner was served at 7, and twice that week the Duke joined her, though joined was generous. He sat across from her, ate efficiently, and spoke only when necessary. The weather will turn tomorrow, stay indoors. Mrs. Halloway mentioned you requested additional candles. They've been provided. Thank you. That was the extent of it. Eleanor spent her days in the library. It was the only room in the house that felt alive. The shelves were crammed with books, history, philosophy, agricultural treatises, volumes on law and land management. She found her father's name in the margin of one text, a note scribbled in faded ink. Tried this rotation method in 09. Yield increased 14%. Recommend. It startled her. The Duke had known her father, had corresponded with him perhaps. She'd forgotten that. She pulled the book from the shelf and sat in the window seat, reading until the light faded. On the 8th day, she broke a rule. Not intentionally. She had simply walked too far. The grounds at Greymont were extensive, manicured near the house, wild farther out. Eleanor had taken to walking every afternoon, following the gravel paths that wound through the gardens and into the edges of the surrounding woods. It helped. Movement helped. But that afternoon she'd lost track of time. She'd followed a narrow trail deeper into the trees, where the light turned green and soft, and the air smelled of moss and damp earth. It was quiet in a way London never was. Peaceful. She didn't realize she'd crossed onto the neighboring estate until she saw the stone marker half hidden in the underbrush. Boundary, Greymont, Ashton Park. She stopped, turned, and found the Duke standing 30 feet behind her, his expression unreadable. Her heart lurched. I didn't realize, she started. You're off Greymont land. I know, I'm sorry. I lost track of... It's not safe. She blinked. Safe? He closed the distance between them with measured steps, his hands clasped behind his back. Ashton Park is unoccupied. The woods are not maintained. There are hunters, poachers. You could be mistaken for an intruder. I was just walking, alone, without informing anyone. She bristled. I am not a child. Then do not behave like one. His tone was sharp, but something beneath it wasn't anger. It was concern, or the closest thing to concern she'd ever heard from him. Eleanor crossed her arms. I did not mean to worry you, Your Grace. I am not worried. I am responsible. There's a difference. Is there? He looked at her for a long moment. The forest around them was silent, except for the faint rustle of leaves. You do this often, he said finally. Do what? Push boundaries. Test limits. I was walking. You were exploring, he corrected. There's a difference. She almost smiled, almost. And you disapprove. I recognize it. He turned and began walking back toward Greymont. Come, it's getting dark. Eleanor hesitated, then followed. They walked in silence for several minutes, the path winding back through the trees. The sky above was turning violet. You knew my father, Eleanor said suddenly. The Duke glanced at her, surprised. I did. You corresponded with him. On agricultural matters. Briefly. He respected you. The Duke said nothing. He said you were one of the few men in Parliament who read the bills before voting on them. A faint, humorless sound escaped him, not quite a laugh. That is a low bar, Miss Ashford. It's higher than most clear. He didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted, softened just slightly. They reached the edge of the gardens. The hall loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly in the dusk. "Why did you agree to this?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Truly." The Duke stopped, turned to face her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because if I had refused, they would have sent you somewhere worse." The words landed softly, carefully. Eleanor stared at him. "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed, "but I knew your father. And I know what happens to women who are declared inconvenient." There was something in his voice, something old and buried. Eleanor wanted to ask, wanted to press. But before she could, he turned and walked toward the house, leaving her standing alone in the fading light. That night Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in her room, watching the moonlight spread across the grounds. Her mind kept circling back to the Duke's words. They would have sent you somewhere worse. Worse than exile. Worse than this cold, silent house. She thought of the women she'd heard about in London, the ones who went away for rest cures, the ones whose families declared them hysterical, fragile, unsuitable for society, the ones who never came back. A chill ran through her. She pulled her shawl tighter and looked out at the hall's dark silhouette. Somewhere in that maze of stone and silence, the Duke of Greymont was awake too. She could see a single light burning in what she'd come to recognize as his study. He worked late, every night. She wondered what he was working on. What occupied a man so rigid, so controlled, that he could not allow himself even the luxury of rest? She wondered what it cost him. The next morning, Eleanor found a book waiting outside her door. It was old, leather-bound, the title embossed in faded gold, Essays on Justice and Reform. Tucked inside the front cover was a note, written in precise, slanting script. "You may find this useful. The library is yours." G. Eleanor stood in the doorway, holding the book, her throat tight. It wasn't kindness, not exactly, but it was something. And for the first time since arriving at Greymont Hall, she felt the faintest, most fragile flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was possibility. 3 weeks into her stay, Eleanor broke another rule. This time it was intentional. She'd been reading in the library when she'd found it, a letter tucked inside a volume on estate law, addressed to the Duke, and dated 6 months prior. It had been opened, read, and apparently forgotten. The letter was from a tenant farmer named William Trent. It was formal, carefully worded, and desperate. "Your Grace, I write to inform you that the new land agent, Mr. Osborne, has increased rents by 30% without notice or justification. 3 families have already been forced to leave. I do not wish to burden you with complaints, but I fear if this continues, there will be no one left to work the land come spring." Eleanor read it twice. Then she went looking for the Duke. She found him in the east drawing room, reviewing what appeared to be account ledgers. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting to mild surprise. "Miss Ashford." She held up the letter. "Did you know about this?" His gaze dropped to the paper in her hand. Something flickered across his face, recognition, then something harder. "That is private correspondence. That is a man asking for help, and it is none of your concern." Eleanor stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "Your land agent is extorting your tenants. How is that not your concern?" The Duke set down his pen with deliberate precision. "Mr. Osborne's methods are aggressive. I am aware." "Aware?" She couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "You're aware that families are being forced from their homes and you've done nothing?" "I have done what is necessary." "Which is?" "I have instructed him to moderate his approach." Eleanor stared at him. "And has he?" The Duke's jaw tightened. He did not answer. "You don't know," she said quietly. "You told him to be reasonable and you assumed he'd obey." "I do not assume, Miss Ashford. I delegate. There is a difference. Not when people are suffering." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know nothing about managing an estate. Nothing about the financial pressures, the debts, the expectations. Osborne was hired because he produces results. He produces fear. He produces income." The Duke's voice was cold now, controlled. Which keeps this estate running? Which pays the staff, which ensures that 60 families have roofs over their heads and food on their tables? You think I enjoy this? You think I don't see the cost? Then why tolerate it? Because the alternative is worse. The words came out sharper than he'd intended. He caught himself, exhaling slowly. If the estate fails, everyone suffers. That is the reality. That is the burden of responsibility. Eleanor held his gaze. My father used to say that men who hide behind responsibility are just afraid to make hard choices. The Duke went very still. For a moment, she thought he might order her from the room, might remind her, coldly and finally, that she was a guest here under duress and she had no right to question him. Instead, he said very quietly, Your father had the luxury of moral clarity. I do not. There was something raw in his voice, something that wasn't anger. It was pain. Eleanor felt the fight drain out of her. She set the letter on the desk. I'm not trying to attack you, Your Grace. I'm trying to understand. There is nothing to understand. He turned toward the window, his posture rigid. I make the decisions I must. I live with the consequences, that is all. And if there's a better way, there isn't? How do you know? He didn't answer. Eleanor watched him for a long moment, this man who carried himself like stone, who spoke in absolutes, who seemed to believe that feeling anything was a form of weakness. I'd like to visit the tenants, she said quietly. He turned sharply. No. Why not? Because you are here to recover your reputation, not to involve yourself in matters that do not concern you. People being harmed concerns me. Your concern is a luxury you cannot afford. The words hit like a slap. Helena stepped back, her throat tight. You think caring is a luxury? I think, he said slowly, meeting her gaze, that caring without power is indulgence, and you, Miss Ashford, have no power here. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but she couldn't, because he was right. She had no power, no standing, no ability to change anything. She turned and left the room without another word. That night, Eleanor didn't go down to dinner. Mary, the young maid assigned to her, brought a tray to her room and set it on the small table by the window. His Grace asked if you were unwell, Mary said softly. Eleanor didn't look up from the book she was pretending to read. Tell him I'm fine. Yes, miss. Mary hesitated at the door. Miss Ashford? Eleanor glanced up. Mr. Osborne came by the estate today, Mary said quietly. There was shouting. I heard Mrs. Halloway say the Duke dismissed him. Eleanor's breath caught. Dismissed him? Yes, miss, effective immediately. Mary curtsied and slipped out, leaving Eleanor alone with the news. She set down her book slowly. He'd dismissed Osborne. After their argument, after she'd challenged him. She didn't know what to do with that. The next morning, Eleanor found the Duke in the stables. He was inspecting one of the horses, a massive grey gelding that seemed entirely unbothered by his presence. The Duke ran his hand along the animal's flank, checking for something Eleanor couldn't identify. Your Grace. He glanced over his shoulder, unsurprised. Miss Ashford. She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. I heard about Mr. Osborne. Word travels quickly. Did I? She hesitated. Did I cause that? He straightened, brushing dust from his hands. You caused nothing. I made a decision. Because of what I said. Because of what I should have seen myself. He looked at her directly. You were right. I delegated responsibility without ensuring accountability. That was my failure. Eleanor stared at him, stunned. The Duke of Greymont did not seem like a man who admitted failure. I've appointed a new agent, he continued. Someone I trust. He'll review every contract, every rent increase, every decision Osborne made. If there are families who were wrongly displaced, I will offer them restitution. That's... Eleanor's throat tightened. That's good, that's right. It's overdue. He turned back to the horse. I told you I do not enjoy this, Miss Ashford. I meant it. She watched him for a moment, this severe, contained man who seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 invisible rules. Why do you do it? She asked quietly. Do what? Hold yourself to such impossible standards. His hand stilled against the horse's neck. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, because the alternative cost me everything once. I will not allow it to happen again. There was finality in his voice, a door closing. Eleanor didn't push. But as she left the stables, she realized something had shifted between them. He had listened to her. He had acted. And for the first time since arriving at Greymont, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Winter arrived at Greymont Hall with cold precision. The grounds turned white overnight, the trees skeletal against a grey sky. Inside, fires burned in every hearth, and the staff moved quietly through halls that seemed even more austere under the weight of snow. Eleanor had been there 6 weeks. It felt like longer, and somehow not long enough. She'd fallen into a strange, uneasy rhythm. Morning walks along the snow-cleared paths, afternoons in the library, reading everything from philosophy to farming journals, evenings by the fire in her room, writing letters she'd never send. And increasingly, she found herself in the Duke's orbit. Not intentionally, or perhaps it was. She wasn't sure anymore. He'd begun joining her for dinner more frequently. At first, the meals were silent, punctuated only by the clink of silverware. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, conversation began to emerge. It started with the tenants. "The Trent family has returned," the Duke said one evening, cutting into his venison with surgical precision. "The new agent secured them a plot near the western fields." Eleanor looked up. "That's good. It's adequate." He paused. "William Trent asked me to convey his thanks to you." "To me. He heard you were the one who brought the matter to my attention." Eleanor set down her fork. "How did he hear that?" "Staff gossip, I assume. This house has no secrets." She couldn't tell if he was annoyed or resigned. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said quietly. "I know." He met her gaze. "Which is precisely why it mattered." There was something in his expression, not quite approval, but close enough that her chest tightened. They returned to eating in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was different, aware. 3 days later, Eleanor found the Duke in the library, standing in front of the fire with a letter in his hand. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight. She almost turned to leave. But something about the way he was standing, perfectly still as though holding himself together by force, made her hesitate. "Your Grace?" He didn't turn. "You should not be here. I was looking for a book. Find it and go." The words were clipped, dismissive. But his voice was wrong, too controlled. Eleanor closed the door softly behind her. "What happened?" "Nothing that concerns you." "That's not an answer." He exhaled sharply, crumpling the letter in his fist. "My sister is getting married." Eleanor blinked. She hadn't known he had a sister. That's good news, isn't it?" "It should be." He turned finally, and the expression on his face was something she'd never seen before. Not anger, not coldness, grief. "She's marrying a man I do not trust," he said quietly. "A man whose reputation is built on charm and debt, but she believes herself in love, and our mother supports the match. And you don't. I see the future she's walking into, and I cannot stop it." Eleanor took a step closer. "Have you told her your concerns?" "Of course." "And?" "She believes I am incapable of understanding love, that I judge everyone by impossible standards." His voice was bitter. "Perhaps she's right. Or perhaps you've seen what happens when people ignore warning signs." He looked at her sharply. Eleanor held his gaze. "You said once that the alternative cost you everything." "What did you mean?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. He'd retreat behind that wall of cold formality, and the conversation would end. But instead, he crossed to the desk and poured himself a measure of brandy. He didn't offer her one. He simply stood there staring into the glass. "I was engaged once," he said finally. "When I was 26. Eleanor went very still. Her name was Catherine. She was beautiful, vivacious, the kind of woman who made every room feel brighter." He took a slow sip. "I was utterly besotted." The word sounded strange in his mouth, fragile. "She came with debts," he continued. "Her family had mismanaged their finances for years. I didn't care. I thought love was enough. I thought I could protect her. What happened? I married her." His voice was flat now, emotionless. "Within a year, her family's creditors came for her. Then for me. They'd hidden the extent of the damage. The debts were catastrophic. I spent 3 years paying them off. Every investment, every reserve. I nearly lost Greymont." Eleanor's breath caught. "And Catherine?" She hated me for it. He set down the glass. Hated that I'd brought her to this cold, severe house. Hated that I worked constantly. Hated that I couldn't give her the life she'd been promised. We barely spoke the last year of her life. How did she... Fever. She'd gone to visit her family in London. Fell ill. Died before I could reach her. He turned away from Eleanor, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. The last words she said to me were that I'd made her regret ever knowing me. The silence that followed was crushing. Eleanor didn't know what to say. There were no words that could touch that kind of pain. So yes, Miss Ashford, he said quietly, I hold people to impossible standards, because I learned what happens when you don't. You lose everything. And you spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have prevented it. Eleanor crossed the room slowly. She stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to speak softly. You're not responsible for her family's lies, she said. I'm responsible for not seeing them. You were in love. Love makes us blind. Then love is a weakness. Or it's human. He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw him fully. Not the Duke, not the cold, controlled guardian. Just a man who had been hurt so deeply, he'd built a fortress to survive. I'm sorry, Eleanor said quietly. For what she said. For what you lost. He didn't respond. But something in his expression softened. They stood there in the firelight, the snow falling silently outside, and for the first time Eleanor understood. The Duke of Greymont wasn't unfeeling. He felt everything. He'd just learned to survive it by locking it away. That night, Eleanor wrote in her journal for the first time in weeks. I think I've been wrong about him, not entirely, but in the ways that matter. He is not cold, he is careful, and perhaps that is not weakness. Perhaps that is simply survival. The next morning, the Duke was gone. Mrs. Halloway informed Eleanor that he'd left before dawn to meet with his sister in London. When will he return? Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. He did not say, miss. Eleanor spent the day restless, unable to focus on her books, unable to settle. The hall felt emptier without him. She hated that she'd noticed. He returned 4 days later, in the middle of a snowstorm. Eleanor heard the commotion from her room, the sound of horses, raised voices, the heavy thud of the front door. She descended the stairs to find the Duke standing in the entrance hall, snow dusting his shoulders, his face drawn with exhaustion. Your Grace. Mrs. Halloway hovered nearby, concern flickering across her usually stoic face. You should not have travelled in this weather. I had to. He saw Eleanor on the stairs and stilled. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he spoke, his voice rough. She called off the engagement. Eleanor's breath caught. Your sister. I told her the truth, all of it, what I'd learned about him, and she believed me. He exhaled slowly, something like relief flickering across his face. She's coming here next month to stay for a while. Eleanor descended the last few steps. That's good. It is. They stood in the dim hallway, snow melting into puddles at his feet. You were right, he said quietly, about love not being a weakness. I'm still not sure I believe it, but I'm willing to consider the possibility. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying. Welcome home, Your Grace, she said softly. His gaze held hers. Thank you, Miss Ashford. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Greymont Hall didn't feel like exile. It felt like something else entirely. The month that followed was the quietest and loudest of Eleanor's life. Quiet, because the snow kept them inside. Because the world beyond Greymont felt distant, almost imaginary. Because the days passed in routine so familiar, they became a kind of language. Loud, because everything had changed. The Duke still worked long hours, still maintained his rigid discipline, but he'd begun to seek Eleanor out, not for any stated purpose, just presence. He'd find her in the library and sit in the chair across from hers, reading in silence. He'd join her for morning walks, even though he hated the cold. He'd linger after dinner, asking her thoughts on things that mattered, governance, justice, the balance between tradition and reform. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the fortress he'd built around himself began to show cracks. It started with a laugh. They were in the library one afternoon, and Eleanor had been telling him about a disastrous dinner party she'd attended in London, where the hostess's parrot had stolen an entire roast chicken and refused to give it back. She spent 20 minutes trying to coax it down with poetry, Eleanor said, barely able to keep a straight face. Byron, specifically. The parrot was unimpressed. The Duke's mouth twitched. Then, to her absolute shock, he laughed. It was brief, barely more than an exhale of sound. But it was real. Eleanor froze, staring at him. He caught her expression and cleared his throat, composing himself. "That is absurd." "That's London society," she said softly. "Absolutely absurd." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe even fondness. "I do not miss it," he said. "Neither do I." They looked at each other, and Eleanor felt the air between them shift, tighten. She looked away first. The second crack came during an argument. They'd been discussing a new bill in Parliament, one that would restrict women's property rights even further. Eleanor was furious. The Duke was pragmatic. "It will pass regardless of whether we approve," he said calmly. "That doesn't mean we should accept it." Acceptance and acknowledgement are not the same thing. "They are when you do nothing to oppose it." He set down his teacup with a sharp clink. "And what would you have me do, Miss Ashford? Storm into Parliament and demand reform? I am one man, one voice." "You're a duke. That voice carries weight. Only when used carefully." "Carefully," she repeated, her frustration boiling over. "You mean silently. I mean strategically. There's no strategy in cowardice." The word hung between them like a blade. The Duke went very still. His expression was unreadable. Then he stood, crossed to the window and spoke without turning. "I used my voice once. Publicly. Loudly." His tone was quiet, controlled. "I opposed a land enclosure bill that would have displaced hundreds of families. I spoke on the floor of the House of Lords. I was passionate, certain, righteous." Eleanor waited. "The bill passed anyway," he continued, "and the man who sponsored it retaliated. He called in debts I didn't know I owed. Debts Catherine's family had hidden. He destroyed 3 of my business partnerships. He ensured I was excluded from every meaningful political conversation for 2 years. He turned to face her. "So yes, Miss Ashford, I am careful. Because I learned that righteousness without power is just noise, and noise gets you crushed." Eleanor stared at him, her anger draining away, replaced by something heavier. "But you still did it," she said quietly. "You still spoke. And I lost. But you tried." She took a step closer. "You risked everything because it was right. That's not weakness. That's courage. It's stupidity. It's both." She held his gaze. "And I think that's the version of you I respect most." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression cracked further. "You are dangerously naive," he said softly. "And you're dangerously afraid," she countered. Neither of them looked away. Finally, the Duke exhaled. "Perhaps we're both right." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Perhaps." The third crack came 3 weeks before her term at Greymont was set to end. They were walking the grounds. The snow had melted enough to reveal the first hints of spring, when the Duke stopped abruptly. "I've been thinking," he said. Eleanor glanced at him. "About?" "Your future." Her stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about it. About what would happen when the 6 months ended. About where she would go. "And?" she asked carefully. "You should not return to London." Her heart sank. "You think I'm still too scandalous?" "No." He turned to face her. "I think London will destroy you. Not because you're scandalous, because you're too good for it." Eleanor blinked, stunned. "You care about things that matter," he continued. "You fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. That kind of conviction doesn't survive in drawing rooms and dinner parties. It gets worn down, turned into performance." "So what do you suggest?" she asked quietly. "Stay here." The words were so soft she almost didn't hear them. "Stay?" "Not as a ward." He seemed to be choosing his words very carefully. "As a resident, a guest. You could help with the estate. Work with the tenants. Use your mind for something real." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You'd allow that?" "I'd welcome it." His gaze was steady, serious. "You've changed things here, Miss Ashford. For the better. I don't want that to end." She didn't know what to say. The offer was everything she hadn't known she wanted, but there was something else beneath it. Something unspoken. "Why?" she asked softly. The Duke hesitated. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his expression. Because Greymont is better with you in it, he said finally. And so am I. The words landed like a confession. Eleanor felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Something warm and terrifying and entirely inappropriate. She took a step back, needing distance. "I'll think about it," she managed. He nodded, his expression unreadable again. Of course. But as they walked back to the hall in silence, Eleanor's mind was racing, because she'd realized something in that moment. She didn't want to leave, not because she needed safety, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because somewhere in the past 4 months, Greymont had stopped feeling like exile. And the Duke of Greymont had stopped feeling like a stranger. He felt like home, and that terrified her more than anything. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight on the grounds, trying to untangle the knot of feelings in her chest. She cared about him. Not just respected him, not just appreciated his integrity. She cared, and that was a problem. Because men like the Duke, men who'd been hurt so deeply they'd learned to survive by locking everything away, didn't fall in love. They didn't risk themselves again, and she refused to be the fool who hoped otherwise. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor turned. "Come in?" Mary entered, carrying a small envelope. "This came for you, miss. His Grace asked me to deliver it personally." Eleanor took it, her heart thudding. Mary curtsied and left. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper, sealed with the Greymont crest. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet, covered in the Duke's precise handwriting. "Miss Ashford, I am not a man given to sentiment. You know this, but I find I must be honest. You asked me once why I agreed to this arrangement. I told you it was duty. That was true. But it is no longer the reason I hope you will stay. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if I am capable of offering you more than this quiet, imperfect life. But I know that I would like to try, if you will allow it. Yours, in whatever manner you deem appropriate." G. Greymont. Eleanor read it twice, then a third time. Then she pressed it to her chest and let herself cry, not from sadness, but from something so overwhelming she had no other way to release it. Relief, hope, and the terrifying, exhilarating realization that she was falling in love. Eleanor didn't answer the letter, not immediately, not with words. The next morning she found the Duke in the stables, brushing down the grey gelding he favoured. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Ashford, Your Grace." She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "I read your letter." He set down the brush slowly. "And I think we should talk." "Of course." He gestured toward the stable door. "Shall we walk?" They walked in silence for several minutes, following the path that led through the gardens toward the edge of the woods. The air was crisp, the sky pale and clear. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I need to understand something," she said quietly. "What are you offering me?" The Duke didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be weighing his words. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I know what I want to offer. Respect, partnership. A place where your mind and your convictions matter. But I also know I am not easy, I am not warm. I have spent years building walls that I am not sure I know how to dismantle." "I'm not asking you to dismantle them," Eleanor said. "I'm asking you to let me in." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "I don't know if I can," he said quietly. "I don't know if I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together." His breath caught. "You're saying yes." "I'm saying—" Eleanor took a careful breath. "I'm saying I want to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone you feel responsible for, but as someone you chose, and who chose you." Something in his expression cracked open, not entirely, but enough. "You should not," he said, his voice rough. "Choose me. I am not a good bet, Miss Ashford. I am cold, difficult. I will fail you." "Probably," she agreed. "And I will frustrate you, challenge you, refuse to be silent when you wish I would." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I know. And you still wrote that letter?" "I did." Eleanor stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Then stop telling me what I should do," she said softly, "and trust that I know my own mind." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, so slowly she barely registered the movement, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was careful, tentative, as though he expected her to pull away. She didn't. They stood there in the pale morning light, hands joined, and for the first time, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, not ease, but rightness. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from London. It was delivered by royal courier, sealed with the Prince Regent's crest. The Duke opened it in his study, Eleanor sitting across from him. They'd fallen into the habit of working together in the mornings, he on estate business, she on correspondence with tenants and local families. As he read, his expression went carefully blank. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. He set the letter down, exhaling slowly. "The Prince Regent is pleased with the restoration of your standing. He is prepared to return you fully to royal favour. You may return to London whenever you wish." Eleanor's breath caught. "I can leave?" "You're free to leave." He looked at her directly. "The contract is fulfilled." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor said very quietly, "What do you want me to do?" The Duke's jaw tightened. "That is not my decision to make." "Isn't it?" "No." He stood, crossing to the window. "You came here under duress. You've done everything asked of you. You've more than earned your freedom. I will not trap you here because I've grown accustomed to your presence." Eleanor rose slowly. "And if I choose to stay, not because I'm trapped, but because I want to?" He turned to face her and she saw the conflict in his expression, hope warring with fear. "Then I would—" He stopped, started again. "I would be grateful, beyond measure." "Grateful," Eleanor repeated softly. "Is that all?" "No." The word came out rough, honest. "No, it's not all. But it's all I know how to say." Eleanor crossed the room, stopping just in front of him, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him. "Then let me say it," she whispered. "I want to stay. Not because this is easier than London. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because somewhere in the past 5 months, you stopped being my jailer and became the person I most want to talk to walk with, to simply be near." His breath hitched. "Eleanor." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "I don't need you to be warm," she continued. "I don't need grand gestures or poetry. I just need you to be honest, to let me see you, the real you." "You've seen more of me than anyone," he said quietly. "I know, and I'm still here." For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and touched her face, just his fingertips brushing her cheek with such careful gentleness it made her heart ache. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "Maybe not," she said. "But you have it anyway." And then finally, he leaned down and kissed her. It was not passionate, not desperate, it was careful, tender. A question. Eleanor answered by rising on her toes, her hands coming to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, his eyes closed. "Stay," he whispered. "Please." "I'm not going anywhere," Eleanor promised, and she meant it. That afternoon, Eleanor wrote her response to the Prince Regent. "Your Highness, I am grateful for your clemency and for the opportunity to restore my standing. However, I must respectfully decline. I have found purpose here at Greymont Hall, work that matters, a community that needs my voice, and a life that feels true. I do not wish to return to London. With deepest respect, Eleanor Ashford." She sealed the letter and handed it to the courier herself. When she returned to the study, the Duke was standing by the window, his shoulders tense. "It's done," she said softly. He turned, his expression unreadable. "You're certain?" "Completely." Something in him seemed to exhale. He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this choice," he said quietly. Eleanor smiled. "You already are." That night, they sat together in the library, the fire crackling softly, the house silent around them. The Duke was reading. Eleanor was watching him, memorizing the way the firelight softened the sharp lines of his face. "What?" he asked without looking up. "Nothing," she said. He set down his book, turning to face her. "You're staring. I'm appreciating." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I am not particularly appreciable." "You're wrong." He reached out, pulling her closer until she was tucked against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing together. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Greymont allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he deserved this. Deserved her. Deserved happiness. Spring came to Greymont in shades of green and gold. The grounds transformed. Flowers bloomed in the gardens Eleanor had begun redesigning with the head gardener. The tenants' fields turned verdant and full of promise. The hall itself seemed lighter, as though even the stone walls had sensed the shift. Eleanor had been at Greymont for 8 months now. She no longer thought of it as exile. She thought of it as home. The Duke's sister, Amelia, arrived in late March. She was everything he was not. Bright, warm, effortlessly charming. She swept into Greymont like a spring breeze and immediately took to Eleanor. "So you're the woman who's managed to crack my brother's legendary composure," Amelia said during their first dinner together, her eyes sparkling with mischief. The Duke cleared his throat. "Amelia." "What?" "It's true. I haven't seen you smile in years, Gregory, and now you can't seem to stop." She grinned at Eleanor. "What's your secret?" "I argue with him constantly," Eleanor said. Amelia laughed delightedly. "Oh, I like you." The Duke shook his head, but Eleanor caught the faint curve of his mouth. Later that night, after Amelia had retired, Eleanor found him in the library. "She's wonderful," Eleanor said, sitting beside him. "She's exhausting," the Duke said, but his tone was fond. "She loves you." "I know." He looked at Eleanor. "She said I'm different. Happier. Are you?" He considered the question seriously. "Yes, I am." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "Good." Word had spread, as it always did in the countryside. The Duke of Greymont and Miss Eleanor Ashford were something. No one quite knew what to call it. Not engaged, not courting in the traditional sense, but together. The local families had been wary at first. Eleanor's scandal had preceded her, but she'd won them over slowly, through genuine interest, through listening, through showing up when tenant families needed help. She'd organized a lending library in the village, despite initial skepticism from some of the older families. She'd advocated for a school, facing quiet resistance before earning trust. She'd sat through countless meetings with the Duke and the estate's new agent, ensuring that every decision prioritized people over profit. And slowly, Greymont had become more than just the Duke's estate. It had become a community. One morning in early April, Eleanor found a letter waiting for her at breakfast. It was from her mother. She opened it with trembling hands. "Eleanor, your sister is engaged. To a good man, a vicar with a modest living in Derbyshire. She is happy. I am writing because she asked me to. She misses you, as do I. I do not pretend to understand your choices, but I am beginning to accept that they are yours to make. If you ever wish to visit, you would be welcome." Your mother, Eleanor, read it twice, her throat tight. She found the Duke in his study. "My mother wrote," she said quietly, handing him the letter. He read it carefully, then looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Relieved. Sad. Hopeful." She smiled faintly. "All of it. Do you want to visit?" "Someday. But not yet." She met his gaze. "This is where I need to be." He stood, crossing to her, and pulled her into his arms. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking. In May, the Duke made a decision. He gathered the staff, the tenants, and his sister in the main hall, and made an announcement. "I am establishing a trust," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "the Greymont Community Trust. Its purpose is to ensure that this estate operates not solely for profit, but for the well-being of everyone who lives and works here." There was a murmur of surprise. "Miss Ashford will serve as co-trustee," he continued, glancing at Eleanor. "She has the vision and the conviction to ensure this work continues, and I trust her judgment above all others." Eleanor felt her eyes sting. After the announcement, when the room had cleared, she turned to him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He took her hand. "This place belongs to all of us. It's time we made that official." "You're going to change things," Eleanor said softly. "Really change them." "We are going to change them," he corrected. "Together." In June, on a warm evening when the sky was painted gold and pink, the Duke asked Eleanor to walk with him. They ended up at the spot where she'd first crossed the estate boundary months ago, the place where he'd found her and warned her it wasn't safe. "I was wrong," he said quietly, looking out at the trees. "About what?" "This place. I told you it wasn't safe. But you've made it safer than it's ever been, for everyone." Eleanor smiled. "We've made it safer." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eleanor Ashford," he said slowly, "you have upended my life in every possible way. You've challenged me, infuriated me, humbled me. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about control and reputation and what truly matters." Her breath caught. "I don't have poetry," he continued. "I don't have grand romantic gestures, but I have this." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "And I have a question." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a single emerald. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "She was formidable, principled, unafraid. It made me think of you." Eleanor's vision blurred. "I am not asking you to marry me because it's expected," he said. "I'm asking because I cannot imagine my life without you in it, because you are the first person I want to talk to in the morning and the last person I want to see at night. Because you've taught me that vulnerability is not weakness, that love is not a mistake." He took her hand. "Eleanor, will you marry me?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, so she simply nodded, tears streaming down her face. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart racing against hers. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I don't know how to say it properly, but I do." "I love you too," Eleanor managed. "So much." They stood there as the sun set, two people who had been broken by the world in different ways, finding wholeness in each other. 3 years later, Eleanor stood in the garden at Greymont, watching her husband, because yes, he was her husband now, kneeling beside their daughter. Lily was 2 years old, stubborn as her mother, principled as her father, and utterly convinced that every flower in the garden needed to be examined immediately. "Gently," Gregory murmured, guiding her small hand toward a rose. "Like this." Lily patted the flower enthusiastically, then beamed up at him. He smiled, the kind of smile that still surprised Eleanor, even after 3 years. Open, warm, real. Amelia emerged from the house, carrying a tea tray. "Your tenant's delegation is here. They want to discuss expanding the school." "Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes, Eleanor said. "Tell them she'll be there in 20, Gregory called. "She's having tea with her family first," Amelia laughed. "You've gone soft, brother." "Undoubtedly," he agreed, but his tone was content. Eleanor joined them on the garden bench, Lily immediately climbing into her lap. Gregory reached over and took Eleanor's hand, their fingers intertwining. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up London, your old life?" Eleanor looked at him, this man who'd once seemed so cold, so unreachable, and who now looked at her like she was the center of his world. "Never," she said, "not once." And she meant it, because this messy, principled, hard-won life was everything she'd never known she needed. It was real, it was chosen, and it was theirs.
I learned too young how silence wins, how careful men survive. I built my world on discipline, on rules that kept me alive.
They said once lost a name won't heal, that cracks don't fade with time. So I carried weight like it was law and called it being fine.
They told me truth should know its place, their voices like my weight, but I was tired of lowering my eyes, of calling fear my fate.
I didn't come to break your walls or prove you wrong somehow. I only asked if who you were was who you are right now. I never asked you to be brave, just honest when it hurts. And I never planned to feel again, but here you are, it works. We were not bound by by duty or by blame. We were bound by every choice we made when staying hurt the same.
You didn't save me,
I didn't save you too. We just stood in the fire and chose what was true. I watched you challenge what I hid with questions I'd outrun. You saw the cause behind my calm, the battles never won.
I told myself love takes too much, the loss is what it brings. But every night you stayed right here.
You changed what weakness means.
I saw the man behind the title, the weight behind your name. You never asked the world for mercy, you just absorbed the blame. I didn't need a perfect life, a safety wrapped in gold. I needed truth that stayed with me, not comfort growing cold. If love is rich, then let it be. If trust is falling, let me fall. I'd rather choose you every day than never choose it all.
We were not bound by fear or the lives we left behind. We were bound the moment your hand reached out for mine.
You didn't tame me, I didn't pull you through.
We just stood in the fire and chose what was true. If staying cost me everything, then let it cost me proud. I won't be quiet just to fit, I won't disappear now.
I don't have poetry or ease, I don't know how to say, but loving you feels less like
Fear and more like choosing to stay. Not duty, not design,
not the ghosts of former lives. We were bound by what we chose every day, every time. And if the world forgets our name or questions how we dared, let it
remember this alone. We stay because we care. Ooh.